Hello and welcome back to Real Seekers. I'm your host, Dale, the Real Seeker, and I'm joined by a special guest. He's never been on the show before, Emiliano Somont. Hey there, Emiliano. How are you?
Good, Dale. Thank you for having me on the show.
Excellent, excellent. So, yeah, obviously, you wanted to come onto the show to speak about the issue of politics, and quite obviously, U.S. politics, everything going on. The Trump has won the election. It seems like we finally have Christians have a victory. There's someone who's going to stand up for our free speech and our rights and stuff like that in the White House after decades of leadership under the Democrats who've been going after us. But before we get into discussing the issue of politics, I just want to turn it over to you. Do you have any announcements or anything going on in your life that you want to tell the audience about?
Yeah, I'm actually helping Dale Glover, which is you, the host of the Real Seekers podcast, to launch his teaching ministry from his podcast into the community, into churches regarding the Shroud of Turin, along with other apologetic topics which you specialize in. So we have come up with a website. If some of your viewers are interested in seeing it, it's www.shroudexplorations.wordpress.com. That's www. There you can see it on the screen. shroudexplorations.wordpress.com. So now you can actually book Dale Glover to teach on the Shroud of Turin and the new evidence that we have in the last couple of years. It's something very important as the New Testament puts a big emphasis on the Shroud of Jesus and how that was part of the evidence that caused the apostles to believe. So check it out again. Dale's launching his podcast, Apologetics Ministry at Real Seekers into the community for churches and or Christian organizations, events, even podcasts. To hire him, he is an expert on the Shroud of Turin, along with some other apologetics topics. So please check it out again, www.shroudexplorations.wordpress.com.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, that's great. We've been doing a lot of work kind of trying to promote that and get the news out there because I think it's so needed for especially with churches. So obviously, I have an interest in philosophy of religion and Christian apologetics, and I think churches really need that. But with the shroud in particular, it's something that a lot of churches are standoffish about. They really just kind of dismiss it as a Catholic relic, or oh well, isn't that just some medieval hoax? And they really have no idea about the amazing peer-reviewed in secular science journals, the evidence that we have. It's really compelling for the Shroud of Turin. So yeah, I think you yourself were a skeptic before you met me, and I think I
Ye-
managed to turn you.
Yeah, when I went to Bible college, like I guess 25 years ago now, it was exactly demonized the Shroud of Turin as a Catholic relic that originated in the Middle Ages. But as I started doing my own research, because I am a layman researcher, and then started looking at some of your research on it, it really convinced me that there's a lot more here, especially with the new evidence that we have in the last couple of years, which a lot of people within the church are not familiar with. So it's been a pleasure because that's my specialty is in promotions and PR and event planning and stuff like that to be able to work behind the scenes and sort of help launch Dale's new endeavor, I guess, in taking his Real Seekers podcast into the church, into the community. So I hope your listeners will spread the word. I hope they will talk to their pastors and deacon boards um, to Bookdale. And you can do it virtually, like we're doing now, or you can do it in person. Um, but again, if you just go to shroudexplorations.wordpress.com. You can book Dale Glover, who's an expert on the Shroud Turin. He's also an expert on several other apologetics topics related to the resurrection of Jesus. Um, your church will greatly benefit. Um, right now, you're watching the screen in red, but I think when you go at your end, it should be in white. For some reason, Dale has it stuck in red, but at my end, it's in the background is white. There's brochures there. There's flyers for you to share with your churches. Um, I think Dale's going to post a 4-minute video, and we're also going to edit that video with some more information we recently did in the coming week or so. So please share again with your church, with your Christian organizations, with your Bible colleges, with your Bible Christian universities, um, to book Dale Glover. I guess most of you will have to book him virtually, but it's will be really worth your time. It's just really fantastic information that Dale's presenting.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for all your help on that marketing end.
Yeah,
My audience knows I'm not a marketer at all. I'm not the extrovert salesman type and that. So it's good to have you kind of helping me there. And
yeah, my,
love,
my,
love
my, my pleasure, Dale. And I think today's topic is a little bit related. I think everything is a little bit related, right? Like
yeah, yeah.
we don't
And just
we
just
don't we don't
before
we
we
don't
do,
live topics don't live in a bubble, right? They're all interconnected.
absolutely, yeah. There's always a connection there. But just before we get started, I just wanted to say hello to my good friend and fan Ringo Cat coming from Scotland. So he's in the audience paying attention there. So yeah, always great to have Ringo there. But yeah, so as you were saying, in terms of politics, like I said, we've had some major events recently with the U.S. election and that sort of thing. Um, I'm kind of curious because a lot of people after the election, either on the left wing side and on the right wing side, have kind of said, "Oh, okay, I'm done with politics. Good, we've gotten the resolution. We know what's happened. What's the point of caring about politics now? The election's over. If you're on the right side, you're saying we won. We don't need to care about this. If you're on the left wing side, you're kind of depressed and saying, I give up. I want nothing to do with this. So why should we care now that the election's done? Why did you want to do a show on politics?
Yeah, that is a fantastic opening question because I think the majority of us have heard that we shouldn't talk about religion and politics because it's divisive. I remember my grandfather used to say that, right? And it can become very divisive in the community, in the workplace, and now online. But from my perspective, it's politics and religion, along with morality and philosophy, that make the world go round. These are the things that give us our meaning and purpose in life. And so, from my perspective, there's a right side and a wrong side. I do not believe in progressive values. I think this past election has proven that progressive liberal values do not work. And we're going to get into that a little bit today. So I think that's the kickback is that a lot of people feel that we shouldn't talk about politics and religion because they're divisive. But from my perspective, I think it's very important to talk about them because this is what gives us our worldview and purpose. It gives us our moral bearings on what is true and what is false. Like we said before, everything's interconnected, right? So within politics, you're going to have morality, you're going to have religion, you can have truth represented, right? You can have disinformation. So that's my perspective. I think it's important to talk about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's I totally agree with you. I think there are lessons that we should be learning on all sides, kind of thing, from the results of this election. And one of the most important things that you mentioned in your intro there was that issue of like, look, this really was a clash of values,
Yeah.
and the values on the left have really gone radical. They're insane. Like not even using rhetoric or anything like that. It's literally insane. And I think this election proved that most normal people, again, we're seeing lifelong Democrats, people that vote for the left, saying this is just too much. You've crossed
Absolutely.
the line. So I'm wondering, like, what as a from a Christian standpoint, like, of course, we would expect Christians or that to have certain values, but what do you think we can learn that? Well, look, the world isn't that far gone that even people who are non-Christians, atheists, lifelong Democrats, they're also recognizing there's something wrong with these radical values that Kamala Harris was trying to push.
Yeah, that again, that's a great question, Dale. I like to take things back to their foundations or roots, and that's something that liberals and Democrats don't like. So, from a Christian perspective, we believe that there's good and evil, um, and we all know that there's ideologies and values that represent evil and good. So I remember Jesus' words in Matthew 7, verses 13 to 14, taking it back to its roots and foundation, where he actually says that the broad road, and if you look at that word broad, it's the word liberal, it's the word progressive. The broad or progressive road leads to destruction, but the narrow road, if you look at the word narrow in the dictionary, it'll tell you it represents that which is conservative, leads to life. And so I think that's, in a nutshell, what happened in this election, um, is that the liberals self-destructed. And many people are saying that. Scott Jennings, who's a conservative commentator on CNN, has said it. Other conservative commentators have said it. But as you well said, many liberal conservative commentators are saying it. We have James Carville, who's a liberal analyst. He's saying it. Exactly what you said, that they've gone too far. And he's just one of many. And as far as I can count, we have a lot more liberals becoming conservative than conservatives becoming liberal. Now, I do have a little kickback on that, and I like to get your perspective because it deals with philosophy, Dale. And it is that we all know that the seat of the church is persecution. And we all know that in the first century, Christianity was illegal. All the apostles, all the Christians were persecuted and martyred for their faith. And so the church grows under persecution. So that's where I'm, what should I say, undecided, or maybe um, would like to get other people's feedback on, is it really good for government, like what happened 300 years after Jesus' death with Constantine, for the government to actually use Christianity as their standard and sort of use that to, as liberals would say, oppress or discriminate against others. And where I'm going with that is it has happened, where if you go to the extreme right, you become like the Pharisees, right? And you're adding to scripture. And if you go to the extreme right, you become like the Sadducees and you begin to take away from scriptures. So I think both extremes are bad, whether it's legalism on the right, adding to truth and to scripture, or lasciviousness on the left, taking away from the truth. And that's what the progressive liberals would be at, right? And so I just like to get your feedback on that, Dale. Like, okay, the conservatives won, and the Bible does say that righteousness exalts a nation. So that's a good thing. It's going to, Jesus said that the narrow road brings life. So that's a good thing that we have people with common sense, with conservative values, trying to bring the economy back, trying to bring sanity back, with immigration, with crime, with all kinds of other things, with international wars, with self-identification of minors within the LGBT community, just trying to bring sanity, normacy back. But my fear is, I guess it was called during the Jerry Falwell time, the extreme, what was it called? The extreme right? Do you remember, Dale? It had a name.
Oh, you're not talking about fascism, right?
No, I'm talking about Jerry Falwell's movement of the
The Tea
what,
Party. I don't
you know,
know.
where they use, I guess, from some people's perspective, religion or Christianity
Oh,
to become legalistic, to become oppressive, maybe like the way the Catholics did the
yeah.
with the Native Americans, right? Trying to force the Christianity on others. So that's all
Christian
I'm trying to
national.
say. I think it's great. I think it's great that Donald Trump won. Now he has control of the House. He has control of the Senate. But again, we all know that there can be abuse on the right and there can be abuse on the left, like I try to explain. I think that righteousness exalts a nation, but again, Christianity has always grown and prospered under persecution, right? Like, for instance, they tell us that the Christian church is the largest in countries today where there's persecution, like China or Muslim countries, right? It's stronger there and bigger there than here. It's doing better there in that sense, as far as evangelism, than here. So I guess that's the feedback I want to get from you and maybe your listeners is yes, it's great that righteousness now, because I believe Trump is on the side of righteousness, is going to exalt the nation, fix the insanity that the left has destroyed. But again, is the church supposed to be in government? I'm not saying Donald Trump is. So just your feedback on that.
Yeah, so I have several things to say about this, right? So let me start with where I would agree, where I think Christians specifically are going too far in terms of their involvement in the government is the movement you're talking about, Christian nationalism. So it's this idea that we need to use the tools of government to impose Christianity on everyone else. And
Right,
that is totally sinful. That's totally unbiblical. I mean, the Bible is clear that we aren't to impose higher ethical standards or Christian standards on non-Christians, right? If you come to Christianity, yes, we have high, I would say, from a natural, sinful man standpoint, impossible standards to meet up to. I mean, moral perfection is the standard that we're to aim towards, just like our Lord and Savior Jesus, and that's just impossible, even for saved Christians to meet up to. But we're constantly striving to meet
right,
that. But things like no swearing, no divorce. We're not to impose Christian standards and judge non-Christians by those standards. Those things are only within the church for discipline and stuff like that. So Christian nationalism is totally wrong. On the other hand, though, I disagree with people from like, what do you mean and stuff like that, where there are some Christians where it's like, we need to withdraw from politics, where that's of the world. Let's become
right,
like monks living in the desert and just
right,
ignore. That's, you're neglecting your duty. We're to be salt. We're to be of the earth and light to
exactly.
the unbelievers. So we have a responsibility to get involved in things that matter in politics and do everything we can to make the world a better place
Absolutely.
consistent with our Christian standards. And here's, you mentioned the third thing I want to mention, because you mentioned this issue of like, well, shouldn't we as Christians be striving to be persecuted? Like, hey, it's good. That's when the church grows. Let's elect Hitler, so therefore the church will grow. I'm uncomfortable with thinking that. It is true that, just as a matter of fact, historically, the church does seem to grow in times of persecution. But I don't think we should be seeking it out. We should always be.
Yeah, and I wasn't saying that. So if you got that impression, I wasn't saying that we should be voting for liberals to be persecuted. I was just trying to make the point that 300 years after Jesus' crucifixion, Constantine made Christianity the state religion, and from many people's perspectives, he used Christianity as a weapon against his opponents. That's, I guess, the point I was trying to make is government should not be using Christianity as a weapon against your opponents, like the liberals are using progressive, secular, humanistic values and ideologies against us as Christians as a weapon.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, gotcha. So that was against Christian nationalism type thing, right?
Yeah,
That's okay.
yeah, but
Okay.
there's a fine line there too, because obviously as Christians we believe that, for instance, abortion is murder. That life begins at fertilization. So I think that the whole ideology of progress of reproductive rights is completely anti-scientific and immoral and untruthful. It's disinformation because we know that's a separate human being. It's not a part. I heard Justin Trudeau say this. It's not a part of the woman's body scientifically or morally or ethically. It's in the woman's body, but it's not a part of the woman's body. So that would be an issue that we would, you know,
Yeah.
strongly disagree with.
Okay. Okay. So just before we get into specific issues, that
Yeah.
there is one thing that's fascinated me, and I've struggled with a particular issue. But you mentioned about the early church compared to Christians today, and there is something that I find to be a fundamental difference. And I'm wondering what implications you think this difference has. But we live today not under a dictatorship like an empire or something like that, but under a democracy. And in a democracy, we are all political agents. We are actually technically speaking, we are the top of the crop, right? We elect people to represent us, but it is the people who are the leaders. So in that case, all Christians are political agents. Whereas in an empire, they might not be. They might be slaves, or it's really this the rule of the emperor and the Senate.
Right.
What implications do you think that had, if any, like in terms of us being actual political agents that have responsibilities, privileges, and roles to play?
Right. So yeah, that's a good question. I don't know where I really stand on that, to be honest with you. Obviously, there are some theologians that make the argument, the strong argument, that the church is not a democracy. It's really a plurality of elders. But again, those elders are elected by the people, so there is elements of democracy there. As far as government, obviously there was different forms of government in the past in biblical times. So a democracy, I guess, a lot of it had its roots in Greece, right? Would that be correct, Dale?
Yeah, yeah, that's
But the danger with a democracy is this, and maybe I can get your feedback on it. We saw this in this past election, right? So, for instance, if you have more progressive liberals, then they're in a democracy, they're going to win, and they're going to oppress, as they demonstrated, those who are not progressive liberals. So then it becomes a dictatorship. So it becomes a democratic dictatorship because they are elected, but then they use that power to weaponize the justice system, the government against their opponents. Would be religious people, would be traditional people, would be people who hold to traditional family values, would be conservatives. And then if you have more conservatives like you have this time, then we win the democracy, and hopefully we don't do the same thing. And that's why I see on X a lot of people saying, well, should Donald Trump forgive Hunter Biden or others? And I said yes, because it shows that we are bigger people than the progressive people, that we do have forgiveness, we do have mercy, we can show grace, which they do not have. On the other side, though, people should be responsible for their criminal actions. So you got to balance the two. But I don't see forgiveness and mercy and grace on the left. All I see is hatred, bigotry, insanity, defamation of their opponents, and weaponization of the justice system against them, and disinformation. So we as Christians should be different on a personal level, but then when you get into on a national or government level, people should be responsible for their crimes. So how do you balance the two, right?
Yeah, yeah. I totally agree with your point about the tyranny of the majority. That's kind of the technical term
Yeah.
that would be used.
Yes. There you go. So Dale, a democracy can be bad or good, right? If you elect more progressive liberals, as we saw in the 3.5 last years, where Joe Biden won and Kamala Harris, we saw the destruction that they brought, and then
Well,
and then now we have Trump that's elected, and we see that already he's not even president. He's doing so much good.
Yeah, so this is why I think just having a pure absolute democracy without checks and system of checks and balances. That's why we invented stuff like that in terms of certain governments having decentralizing power. We
Right.
have a constitution, in other words, that is agreed upon by the people, and it entrenches certain rights to protect true minorities and prevents abuses of the governments and stuff. But
Absolutely.
as you're saying, even with these, like in Canada, we have what's called the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. We saw how Trudeau trampled on those rights with the Freedom Convoy. Like he just doesn't care. Like we have a clause, the notwithstanding clause, which basically says our government says the hell with your rights, and
Yeah.
that's it.
Did you hear that he's banned prayer?
In front of abortion clinics, that's around the yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I saw that.
that's UK as well. That's terrible. That's a tyranny. That's persecution.
Yeah, yeah.
In
And
my
to me, it's ironic, Dale. We're going to get into it, but it's ironic that everything that the left accuses the right of is exactly what they are and what they're doing. So they
yeah,
accuse Trump of being a fascist, and they prove to be the kings and queens of fascism. They accuse Trump of being Hitler, and they're the ones that have Nazi-like ideologies, and we can get into that later. They accuse Trump of, you know, disinformation, and they're again the kings and queens of disinformation. So, like everything they accuse him of, intolerance, bigotry, is exactly what they are themselves. It's almost like, from a psychological perspective, some psychologists have drawn the comparison. It's gaslighting, but it's also projecting on others your own insecurities and inferiorities. And that goes back to something that you said, Dale, is that the Christian faith, from an apologetics point of view, from a evidence-based point of view, from a mental health point of view, from a point of view of happiness and prosperity and freedom, is superior to a liberal progressive worldview.
gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to you. I totally agree about the projection issue. And I've been fascinated with the liberal media meltdown videos that, like right
Yeah.
after the election. I loved those kind of thing, right? But it's amazing. Some Democrats, such as Van Jones of all
Yes.
people, like at least they are kind of recognizing, like, my dear gosh, like we're never going to win if we keep doing this. They're actually
Exactly.
learning some lessons. But there are some others like Sonny Hostin. Man, that woman's deluded. She's still blaming sexism, misogyny,
Yes.
racism. That's the real reason we lost. And what's the lesson to learn? That well, there the majority of Americans are racist, sexist. Even though she's talking about fellow women, fellow
Right.
gays who voted for Trump, fellow Latinos and blacks who are voting for Trump. So it's just become ridiculous. Some of these people are living in a deluded dreamland of their own making.
Yeah. For
I don't
sure.
even think what.
Even even Bernie Sanders, who's as left as can be, I heard him say
Yeah,
that the left has to change. They can't be just attacking the right for the sake of attacking the right with disinformation. They have to come up with policies and be able to communicate those policies and make sense of it. And they're not. They're not able to do that. It's almost come to like a climax right now where they're self-destructing on every issue. They're completely going bonkers and, like you said, having a meltdown, shaving their heads and refusing to do this, refusing to do that, threatening to leave the country, threatening to hurt themselves, threatening to kill themselves in some cases. Just like it just shows the insanity. And that's the point that I'm making here, is that the radical left, there's a connection between mental illness. Some people actually believe that liberalism is a form of mental illness. I don't know if I
well,
would go that far. Maybe elements of radical
let, let me
leftism
ask,
is.
let me ask this as you get into this
Yeah.
point, because I'm not even sure natural mental illness like Sunny Hostin, she's not mental. She doesn't have a mental disease, but I think that with a lot of them, there's clearly the spiritual warfare. There's Satan who's
Yes.
blinding these people.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
spiritual aspect.
Yeah.
So I just wanted you to
Well,
get your
I,
take.
I'm glad you brought that up, Dale, because as you know, I have a background in mental health as a social worker. So does my wife. I have a colleague, I think I can mention his name, Dr. Anthony Hutchinson, who's an expert on mental illness related to gangs and violence and hostile behavior. I just talked to him this week about an incident. And so and I have another friend named Scott Fairway who also works with people with mental health issues. So this is the fine line. You will see a lot of atheists say, well, in the past, Christians said it was all mental illness, but today with modern science, we know it was only a seizure. You know what I mean? And they were calling seizures mental illness, or now we know it was like bipolar disorder or manic depressant or personality narcissistic disorder or whatever the disorder is, right? But this is the fine line. I don't know if you remember Manassian, who and who that's his last name. I can't remember his first name. Who rented a van several years ago and ran over some people at Finch and Yonge Street in
Oh,
Toronto.
yeah, yeah.
And they were trying to get him off on the fact that he had autism. But the Autism Society came along and said, wait a minute, the majority of people with autism don't rent a van and run over people. So what's the difference? Is you can have a mental disorder like autism, but the majority of people with autism don't commit criminal acts. So I think at the point where you commit a criminal act, become a mass shooter, run over people in the van, start harassing, threatening people, then it gets into the realm of evil. So obviously, a lot of experts will tell you that Hitler had mental illnesses, right? But a lot of the mental illnesses that Hitler might have had, the majority of people with those mental illnesses don't go out and commit the atrocities that he did. So at that point, it crosses over into evil. I don't know if you would agree with that.
100%. That was the point that I was getting at. Like, there's this assumption from the godless left where it's like the Trump, the people who tried to assassinate Trump, like,
Yes, good point.
he's got a mental illness. It's just this automatic. They don't know anything. They just make this automatic assumption before the facts come out. Whether he actually was mentally ill or not, I don't care. But I'm saying there's this assumption that it's just mental illness. That we can't critique him.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Dale, because my question would be to you and to your audience: would the liberal radical leftist who incited that hate and violence by calling him Hitler, which he's nothing like Hitler, Trump is not engaged in committing genocide against people. He's not engaged in a dictatorship or forced equality, doing experimental surgeries on people. I mean, the left is engaged in a lot of that stuff, but conservatives are not. So, would they also, from your perspective, have a mental illness if they're inciting that hate and violence?
So that's my point, is that I don't think in some cases we can attribute it to mental illness, but in certain cases it's not. It is just what you call evil. That people are moral agents and they make
Right.
immoral decisions, and that I think there are some killers that they don't have a mental problem. They're just plain sinners. They're evil. They're sinning. Same with these people in media pushing. Don Lemon, as much as I loathe this guy's politics and his tactics and stuff, he's not mentally deficient. He doesn't have a mental disorder that could be diagnosed. He's just evil when he's lying to people, supporting his agenda. He's a sinner.
Yeah.
He's sinning. That's
Well,
yeah.
I have a quote here, and I want to get your feedback on it. I have several quotes. I did some research by Theodore Roosevelt, who was the 26th U.S. president. So let me just quote what he said and get your feedback on it. And then I'll follow up that with a quote from Clint Eastwood. So Theodore Roosevelt said, to educate a man in mind, but not in morals, is to educate a menace in society. Now let me quote what Clint Eastwood said and get you to respond. Basically, it's under the title of Liberalism is a Mental Disorder. And Clint Eastwood said, quote, we didn't have this many crazy liberals back when we had insane asylums, end of quote.
So yeah, so I guess I'm saying I disagree with the overall generalization that like all of liberalism and the craziness that is
Right,
associated with it now goes back to mental illness. And oh, if we just put in asylums all of those mental illness people, then the problem would go away. No,
right,
I think the main problem is sin in the Liberal Party, and this
right.
inclusivity of sin, and just it started with you do your own thing, you can do whatever you want, and
Exactly.
leave you alone, and then it transforms slowly and surely to we're going to impose sin on you, we're going to force you guys to sin, and if you don't say those pronouns, if you don't endorse bake a homosexual cake, if you don't support women killing their babies in the womb, then we're going to go after you, you're going to lose your job. And it so I see the main problem as sin. Now, that said, it is true that there is scientific studies that you would know more about me that there does tend to be a correlation. There are a lot of mentally ill people within the liberal movement. I think I've seen
Yeah,
studies saying conservatives are down.
I think what Clint Eastwood is trying to say in that quote, and I don't know in what context that was given, right? So, is that there's more people on the left, it seems, because there are people on the right who have mental illness as well. But there's more people, like the leftist ideologies are insane. The radical
I,
transgender
I
movement,
think there's
it's
a
insane.
there.
The whole open border ideology is insane. The whole soft on crime ideology is insane. The whole ideology of um, big, massive government spending, which produces inflation, is insane. The whole leftist ideology of supporting radical Islamic Hamas terrorists is insane, right? And it goes on and on and on.
Yeah,
It's just insanity. There's no common sense in it. It's destructive.
it's corrosive.
It's
I think
corrosive.
this is what Dr. Tony Costa taught
Yeah.
us a sermon where it's like modern leftism and liberalism. It displays a transverse of values to the
Yes.
Christian worldview, and they don't even know it. It's not deliberate. This is why I see Satan's hand behind it. But oh, the liberals are against families. Go ahead and get abortions. Kill your families. That there's more divorces and stuff, and it's seen, oh, get married today and then get divorced the next day afterwards.
Right.
The or crime, right? Okay, the criminal is more important than the victim. There's always these transverse values that I see, and that's what's corrosive. That's what's eating it from within,
Yeah.
and I
And
think
and,
causing a lot of
and
the
if you
now.
look at the foundation, the roots of this, right? You can sort of trace it back. Okay, progressive liberal values. Where did they come from? A lot of these ideologies came from secular humanism. Where did secular humanism come from? Right. Well, different German schools, right? Maybe Marxism, right? And then you keep tracing it back far enough. I mean, it goes back. If you're a believer and you believe in the Garden of Eden, it goes back to the Garden of Eden, where Satan promised that you can self-identify. He promised that you can be God. He promised that you can be above the law. You can become a law unto yourself. So, from a Christian perspective, it goes all the way back to Garden of Eden. It's just basically, to me, a battle between good and evil. And as Jesus well said, that a good tree will produce good fruits. And we see that within conservatism. We already see it. Trump's not even elected, and he's producing good fruit. But a bad tree will produce bad fruit. And I have stats here that we could spend 100 years on. Hopefully, we'll get to some of them, proving that secular humanism, cultural Marxism, progressive liberal values produce bad fruits. We can list the bad fruits, the riots, the social chaos, the educational mess, the financial mess, the immigration mess, the 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 identity crisis within our society, the international wars. There were no wars under Trump. He was the most peaceful president. He he set up the Abraham Accords, right? No other president has been such a good friend to Israel, right? So on and on the list goes, Dale, and we can document from their own sources. I have quotes here. Hopefully, we get them from the government of Canada, from the government of the USA, from their statistical analysis showing that progressive social values produce mental illness, juvenile delinquency. It produces crime. It produces social chaos. It produces riots. It produces tribalism. It produces culture wars. It doesn't produce anything good. It's progressive liberal values are antisocial. So psychologists, I have a quote here from a world-renowned Canadian psychologist where he talks about it, what Jordan Peterson calls it pathological, right? A lot of these ideologies. Others called it it's sociopathic or what's the other word that's stronger than like a
Psychopath.
psychopathic. And there's a difference between psychopathic and sociopathic, right? Um, Obviously, sociopathic doesn't necessarily have the criminal element that the other one has, right? So it's anti social norms, it's anti moral norms, progressive values. They don't work. This last election showed it. They self destructed. They don't work to the point where they know that they're not going to win in the policies, so they begin to embrace Donald Trump's policies, which they don't believe in. So they're lying through their teeth. So there's so many floating elements here, and the self-destruction has begun. The meltdown has begun. They're attacking each other. Progressive, and like you said, true liberals or classical liberals are leaving the Liberal Party, like Tulsi Gabbard, Bobby Kennedy, even comedians like Jon Stewart and Bill, what's his name, Mars,
Yep, Bill Maher.
have criticized the radical left. Said, we haven't changed, you've changed, you've gone off the deep end. So anyway, that's a little background there. If I can get into my points and
Yeah, but okay, just before you do one last kind of major
yeah,
thing. So you mentioned that there is this historically there's this connection going back, and I'm thinking with Marxism. I remember humanism, like the Humanist Manifesto, where they have
yeah,
their counter 10 commandments and stuff, direct denying Christian values, Christian teaching, stuff like that. So I was I was trying to find a clip of JD Vance on Joe Rogan.
yeah,
But he talks about, like what is it that's going on? Like why are they making all these obviously stupid decisions that are hurting Americans? And like they're just commonsensical,
yeah,
like hurting Americans and stuff. Why are they doing this? And JD Vance says it's related to this globalist agenda, right? So
right,
like this is a one world government. You've heard of these from Christians like Kent Hovind and stuff, like one currency, one.
right.
It's kind of like end time stuff, and I'm just kind of wondering. Back in the night, back even like 10 years ago, I think most people would say these guys are kooks. I would have even been skeptical of a lot of stuff, but given what we've seen over the past 4 years, I think that it's definitely at least established the plausibility of this. I'm kind of wondering, do you see this globalist agenda? Is that just a conspiracy in your book still, or is there any
No,
concern?
I don't know a lot about that, but I do agree that it's a part of end time prophecy and it's a global agenda, but it's an agenda of insanity. You know what I mean? I mean, like choosing the environment over people, choosing. It's funny because Kamala Harris says she's about people first, and I want to talk a little bit about that people first because do people really come first, or do principles come first? Does tolerance come first, or does truth come first? Right? Does individuality come first, or does integrity come first? Right? From a Jewish perspective, because I heard Ben Shapiro talk about it, he says no. Principles come before people. If his child goes against his faith or his morality, they're disowned in certain cultures, right? Or the family is very embarrassed or ashamed, right? So principles, if people come before principles, it's social chaos, right? Like it's personal truth. It's everybody doing what's right in their own eyes, like the Bible says, and that creates cultural war. That creates division. That creates tribalism. That doesn't work, right? So, yeah, I agree with what JD Vance says. It's a one world thing. So the contradiction with liberals is so great, and that's the number one country. They're for people first, but they're choosing the environment over people. They're choosing, or they're choosing, choosing radical rights over people's health and happiness. You know what I mean? And it goes on and on and on. They're choosing, illegal immigration, illegal immigrants over their own citizens. Where you have, and I find this hard to believe, but this is what's being reported, that these illegal immigrants, you see it in Toronto, are living in hotels, and they get all their expenses covered for, prepaid credit cards, on and on the list goes. And then veterans and citizens are homeless and struggling and living in poverty. Like, how does that make any sense?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I agree entirely with what you're saying. It's just it's anti common sense, and it just
And
doesn't make
evil. I
sense
think
to us.
there's an evil element to it. Why would you want to destroy society? I mean, the radical transgender movement is destroying people's bodies. It's mutilating, sterilizing their bodies. There's all kinds of side effects, right? And like abortion, it's horrific. It's just
Other stuff
one
going on.
lie after another lie.
Yeah, and with illegal immigration, crime as well. This, just
Yeah,
let these mobs get away with. Oh, it
yeah.
failed us in
Isn't
1950,
that
and then
treason to allow criminals into our country? I just heard yesterday on the news that Canada is not even doing background checks anymore. They're just allowing random people into the country. A lot of them are criminals. It was almost like 500,000 that came out, right? In the States, that's what the number came out.
yeah, but
Um,
even
and,
crime among
and
citizens.
they're just unleashing these criminals to rape, to vandalize, to threaten, to harass, to murder the citizens. Like, that's nothing but pure evil.
Yeah, yeah, and even crime among citizens too. Like
Yeah,
the California. Oh, you can go ahead and steal whatever you want. And now they're basically turning us from a high trust society into a low trust
right.
society, and that is extremely dangerous for the fabric of society and what we've built up in Western democracies over the last couple hundred years and stuff like that. So that's all in service of why would they do this? It
Yeah.
doesn't make sense. It's deeply unpopular, and they know this. That's why I'm saying there is some other agenda at
There
foot.
is, and you have liberals like Mayor Adams from New York. I just saw him on The View. I'm not sure how recent that was, but he's a liberal, and they're accusing him of certain things, whether it's true or not. But the point is, he is speaking out against some of these radical leftist ideology, especially illegal immigration that's destroying New York. And then the ladies on The View are just like, they look disturbed, they sound disturbed. Like, they, if you Google that Mayor Adam on The View, I mean, he's a liberal, and he's just talking common sense, and they're like clueless, like look completely disturbed and bothered and agitated by what he's saying. It's almost like we should allow everything, and who cares about the results?
Mayor Ad. Yeah, if you want, I can play. It's a 5 minute clip. Do you want me to play that clip for you or?
Yeah, if you want to play it, it's just, I saw it yesterday. I don't know when it was done, but
All right.
like you said, like liberals are coming over to the conservative side.
Folks
It's
living
the
in
same, right?
fear. And one of the things that's causing a lot of fear
Is this the clip you have in mind,
Yeah, that's the one.
Jamie? Okay.
right now is immigration and what Trump is promising to do. It was a key issue for voters. Trump is vowing to do mass deportations. There's 500,000 undocumented immigrants living in New York City. Some have lived here for decades. There's Dream Act kids, dreamers living in New York City. Again, some have lived here for decades. What's your message right now for the people in New York living in fear?
And we have to be very clear on the role of immigrants in our country and city. Going back to early Italians, early Irish, early the roles of just all the groups, how they have built this country, and particularly in New York City. I don't believe in mass deportation. This is a city where we tell whomever is here to, if you're a victim of a crime, call the police. If your child must be educated, let them go to school. If you need medical attention, allow them to go to the hospital. But Americans have been clear, though. We have a broken immigration system. I don't believe in mass deportation, but I don't believe in mass saturation. 220,000 migrants and asylum seekers came to the city, cost us $6.4 billion. I'm not allowed to let them work. I'm not allowed to have them be participating in the tax base of this city. We can't deport those who commit crimes in our city. We are not allowed to connect with ICE. This is a failed system. We need to fix it. And if we don't fix it, we're seeing what's happening in Chicago, what's happening in Houston, what's happening in Denver. This is wrong for cities to pick up this cost. They only gave me $200 million out of $6.4 billion that it should have gone to everyday issues in our city.
On the other side of that coin, though, you've got Trump, who says that part of his plan is to send.
Okay, so I think from that clip, we kind of get the point where even these Democratic mayors are having to concede common sense, right? Yeah, like and the inability to do anything about it, it's just ridiculous. Like, this is why.
And these ladies on the View, bless their heart, but they give women a bad name. And if your audience goes back and watches that whole interview, they try to trap him over and over again, or bait him, and he's just too smart. He doesn't fall for it. He just completely ignores him and gives him the fact. It's just the height of stupidity and insanity coming from these women. And I think Sonny's a lawyer. It's just.
Well, supposedly Kamala Harris was too. So.
Yeah, supposedly, yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, I know you've got specifics you want to share, but here's one last question that I think is very interesting, right? Because you've pointed to all, and you're going to go over quotes showing about how wrong society's gone in various ways. But let's say that the election didn't go our way and Kamala Harris won. So that would mean we would have 4 more years of destruction of society, crime, illegal immigration, everything that's been going on where they've kind of crossed the line. Like, how should we of Christians have reacted if Kamala Harris actually won and then they were going to continue on doing all these destructive policies? Like, what would the Christians' role be politically at that point? Should we run to the desert, give up, or like what should we have done?
I think we should. We're not supposed to curse the darkness. We're supposed to be a light in the darkness. So I think we would have continued to be a light in the darkness. I think the church would have grown through evangelism, because again, when Jesus said, if they hated me, they're going to hate you. So if you're not hated by the world, then maybe you're not a true believer, right? He says, my kingdom is not of this world. It's from a different place. So we would have been a light in the darkness, and the church would have continued to grow. Now, on the other hand, righteousness exalts a nation. So now people are going to have a better life. Things are going to be more affordable. Streets are going to be more safe. Children are going to be protected from the radical transgender movement, and on and on and on. It's going to be a better place. And I think that's why people voted for Trump. Not that they necessarily like his rhetoric or his tweets or his personality. It's not a personality contest, right? Maybe she would have won if it was a personality contest. It's a policy contest. And the conservatives are on the right side of policy. The conservatives are on the right side of truth and morality for the most part, and the liberals are not. When you have the Satanic Temple of San Francisco, California, endorsing progressive liberal values and LGBT values, and having banners at pride parades that say, Satan accepts you, Satan loves you. I mean, like, what's that all about?
Awesome. All right, cool. Well, at this point, I want to turn it to you to kind of lead, because I know you said you've got a bunch of points.
Well, not just quotes, more stats, and we can't get through all of them, but just, and your readers can look these up. These are mainstream stats. These are stats from the Canadian government, the U.S. government, just showing that progressive liberal values or secular humanism doesn't work. It has bad fruits. It's a bad tree, like Jesus said, with bad fruits. Right? We've already talked about how let me just say this because I find it kind of ironic. Is that, do you remember, Dale, when, and your audience, when Kamala Harris started her campaign? It was a campaign of, she was the president of joy. Bill Clinton said that, or Bill Winfrey said that, but that joy quickly died out. Do you remember that?
Yep, I remember
Okay,
that.
so that's where she started. The president of joy. This is the campaign of joy. The only problem is it was a fake joy. It wasn't a true joy based on reality, based on true psychology, based on a biblical joy, right? Which is not projected towards, it's projected outward towards God, worshiping God, not projected inward, right? An inward joy is narcissism, is pride, right? An outward joy is praise of the Almighty, our Creator. So I found it really interesting because all the studies that I have seen, mainstream studies, even studies posted or alluded to on liberal networks like CNN, will tell you that conservative people or religious people, and I encourage your audience, to look it up. You could just Google this, and there's tons of studies. Conservative or religious people are happier, have better mental health, are healthier than liberal progressive people. That's just a fact. So right there, we have to conclude Jesus' words that a good tree produces good fruit. Conservatism, right? And a bad tree produces bad fruit. Liberalism. So I think that's interesting. That you can go to www.sanity.webador.com, and that website lists tons of stats. Some of the studies we're talking about showing that the Judeo-Christian values or religious values, conservative values are better, are superior to secular humanistic values, progressive liberal values based on the stats: better mental health, better quality of life, better affordability, better safety on the streets, right? Better everything, right?
Sorry, what was the website again?
Yeah, it's www.sanity, sanity.webador.com. So you have tons of stats there, which we're going to allude to. And these are mainstream stats from government websites, from the LGBT community, proving the point I just said, that conservative religious values are better, are superior than progressive liberal values based on secular humanism. So we've talked about there's better mental health, better quality of life on the right than on the left. You've already talked about inverted morality, which the Bible talks about. It says, woe or judgment is coming to those that call evil good and good evil, to put darkness for light and light for darkness. And that's from Isaiah 5:20. The verse in the Bible that talks about better mental health would be 1 Timothy 1:7, which talks about that God hasn't given us a spirit of fear. And if you notice, the liberals, Dale, and your audience members, the liberals were engaged in fear-mongering speech or hate speech against Donald Trump. Same thing Hitler did, or fascist leaders do, or dictators do towards their opponents, right? They not only weaponize the justice system against conservatives, but they engage in fear. And the Bible says here that God hasn't given us a spirit of fear. We're not supposed to be involved in fear-mongering speech, but of power, of love. And there's no love on the left. It's a fake love. Love is not love, as they often say. Love is not love.
Sorry to interrupt, but it's just what you just said. These insane
Yeah,
movement telling people don't go to Thanksgiving with your husband.
exactly.
Like
Exactly. They're saying basically don't have sex anymore for a year. If you have kids who voted for Trump, cut them off. Like hate.
It's disgusting.
It's disgusting. It's evil. And the Bible says here that God has given us not the spirit of fear mongering. That's all her speeches, Kamala Harris, well, fear mongering. Justin Trudeau does the same thing, just defaming the right. And there's no love there. It's hate. And then notice the end of that verse in 1 Timothy 1:7. He's given us God has given us a sound mind. These liberals don't have a sound mind. They have an insane mind on every single issue. So those are the three points there that I made, which we already talked about, because I'm going to give you some stats now. is that there's better mental health, quality of life, and the Bible supports that on the right than there is on the left. Their inverted morality is based on secular humanism, which the Bible condemns. It's disinformation. It's antisocial, calling good evil and evil good and vice versa. And then it's antisocial. We talked about this already. Antisocial values and ideologies, which Romans 1 talks about. And we don't have time to get into Romans 1, but I encourage your listeners to read Romans 1, 18 to 32, because it talks about abnormal or unnatural lifestyles, specifically lesbianism and homosexuality. It talks about in this passage about the stupidity where those who claim to be wise become fools, so they become insane and stupid in their thinking. And and you're an expert on this, Dale, that God's character and truth is evident, but they deny it, they suppress it. And I remember you had a show on this where people were saying, well, how come God's hidden this? Well, God is not hidden. It's that your conscience is seared, your conscience is closed. When you have a hard heart, then it's not that God's is hidden, it's that you have a hard heart. And then God allows that stubbornness to continue unless you repent, in the case of Pharaoh. And I looked up that word suppress, and it means this. It's very interesting: to smother, to ignore, to smear, to stifle, to cover, and to censor. And that's exactly what these people do. So that's a whole bunch of hogwash that God is hidden from them. No, it's that they have a hard heart. This whole passage talks about this, and that hard heart leads to depravity. It says it leads to insanity. It leads to unnatural lifestyles. And then it finished by saying that it finishes at the end by saying that these people become vindictive and unreasonable and traitors. And that's exactly what they're doing, just stabbing each other in the back, because they're not only promoting these lifestyles, but approving or affirming others to do these lifestyles, which are unnatural and evil. So please read Romans 1, 18 to 32, because it basically, in a nutshell, just describes what's going on in our society. So that was the first point I had, Dale, is that liberal progressive values don't work, as they are destructive towards society. Jesus predicted this in Matthew 7, 13 through 14. And then the second point is we don't fight against earthly people, but evil powers, according to Ephesians 6, 12. And the third point, and this is where we finish with the stats, is that a good tree produces good fruit, but a bad tree produces bad fruit, according to Jesus in Matthew 7, 14 through 20. So I have some stats here. Do you want to go through some of them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, we can only do some. So go to www.sanity.webador.com and you'll get the rest of them. There's so many, but I'm going to quote something here from Dr. Have you ever heard of, let me spell his name, Dale, because I can't even pronounce it. His first name is Klaus, and his last name is Bockmuel.
So first name is K-A.
And then Bockmuel. He wrote a book called The Challenge of Marxism, and he states this: in order for a purpose to help the contradictions of human existence, it must point beyond humanity, and it must be beyond human manipulations. In other words, you cannot fix the problem with the problem or with the corruption that created the problem in the first place. And this is ironic because Donald Trump basically said that. She broke it, I will fix it. How can she fix or be the solution to something that she caused, right? And it goes back to a quote, and this would be of interest to you, Dale, because of your background in philosophy. Let me see if I can hide it. It's by Friedrich Nietzsche, who says that we are our greatest enemy. So I hope we can do a whole show on secular humanism, because secular humanism puts the emphasis on us. But if we're our greatest enemy and we are the problem, then secular humanism doesn't work, right? So some of the quotes here from the Canadian government and the US government is this: 36%. So people with progressive liberal values or LGBT values or secular humanistic values are 36% more likely to lie to their parents or persons in authority, 48% more likely to cheat on exams, 2 times more likely to try to physically hurt someone, 2 times more likely to watch pornography, 2 times more likely to get drunk, 2.25 times more likely to steal, and 3 times more likely to use illegal drugs, 6 times more likely to attempt suicide, 75% more likely to suffer from chronic mental illness, 4 times more likely to be resentful and angry with life, 2 times more likely to lack purpose in life. And then they go on to give tons of other stats that we really don't have time to go into, Dale. But that's some of the stats. Here's an interesting, because we're Canadian, right, Dale? So here's some
I'm so
recent stats from Canada, just from last year, from Stats Canada, 2023, which Canada released, basically saying that the LGBT youth are 120% more likely to end up homeless, and that they represent about 40% of homeless youth. And then they go on to give all kinds of other stats, which we can't get into, about juvenile delinquency, vandalism, that it just has risen by huge percentages from the 1950s and 60s, all related. You can relate it and connect it to secular humanism, because we didn't have the progressive liberal values weren't where they are today when they were back then. Do you want more stats, Dale, or is that enough?
It's totally up to you. I've got time.
Yeah, I don't want to bore your audience. They can go to that website, look them up
Okay.
themselves. But I mean, the stats have gone through the roof on every issue since we've elected liberal progressive governments. I can get into some quotes here from some famous politicians, which I find interesting, if you want to move on from the stats. But I do, like I said, we could spend 100 years here on stats.
Let me ask you this then, because we spent a lot this whole show kind of linking, like almost making it seem like, okay, look, that anytime it's liberal, like you've got no choice. If you're a Christian, you have to vote conservative every single time. And I'm not totally sold on that. Like, I'm ashamed to admit it, but in 2015, I thought Justin Trudeau was the right choice, and I voted for him. Now, turns out I was wrong, but I don't. Is it the case that liberals are always the wrong choice? Like 20 years from now, could there be a good Democrat or a liberal?
Well, that's a fantastic point, because I'm not conservative or liberal. I'm actually independent. But again, it just seems to me from these stats, and there's pages and pages and pages of stats where suicide is higher, mental illness is higher, crime is higher, alcohol is higher, drug addiction is higher, juvenile delinquency is higher under progressive ideologies. It just destroys the fabric of society, creates social chaos, moral degeneration. Like the stats are mind blowing. I have probably here 30 pages of stats. So I just want to respond to that. So I would have voted for Bobby Kennedy. I like him a lot, and he's a liberal, and he's still liberal as far as I know. But he's not going to work in the Trump administration. But he has said, like, his uncle and his dad would not be in the Liberal Party today. So the Liberal Party has degenerated, right? So, like, I don't know any liberals today that are presenting a normal, healthy platform. I mean, they're all coming over to the conservative side. Like Tulsi Gabbard, was high up in the Liberal Party. She's not the Liberal Party. She's actually become a conservative, right? Now, there are liberal concepts, and sometimes they connect them to the social gospel or Jesus ministry. I sort of disagree with that terminology, because you're sort of putting terminologies you're putting modern terminologies to what Jesus did back in the first century, which I think has nothing to do with it. But what I'm trying to allude is like certain social programs are good. Like what people with disabilities, right? They need social assistance, right? Universal health care, right? Like we have here in Canada. It's not perfect, but it's good because it helps people that can't pay for that. You know what I'm saying? So there are social programs that benefit people. But when you take that to the extreme, it just hurts. It hurts society, right? You have like country, and more people are realizing this, right? Um, that some of these social programs are good, but that some of the values that go along with it are not good, right? So you got to sort of separate the two. But we as conservatives believe in that, so it's not just a liberal thing. Maybe they've pushed it more: social assistance, social programs, social welfare, as they call it, right? Some of the Scandinavian countries are a good example of that, where they're now becoming more conservative in their values, but they still have those social programs, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get what you're saying there, and yeah, is number one, just so you know, Jamie, the fans are saying they're not bored at all. This is a great show, so they're enjoying.
Oh, okay. It's just too many stats. It's better for them to look them up. I mean,
Well, let me ask this about the stats, because I just wanted to know, like, obviously we have our kind of overall diagnosis of this
yeah,
spiritual aspect as Christians, but what are the psychologists saying? Like, what aside from just saying, well, liberals are correlated to these things, do they have any notion as to why liberalism is
yeah,
causing all
and
these problems? Like, what is it about?
yeah. So, like you and I have talked about this before. There's a lot of pressure on professional psychologists and doctors where they will be censored or reprimanded or they lose their licenses if they don't go along with the woke agenda. So this is a good thing now that Donald Trump's got elected, because now they can speak the truth. So the psychologists, tons of psychologists, people can Google it for themselves. Obviously, we all know of Dr. Jordan Peterson, and he calls LGBTQ and progressive ideologies pathological and dangerous. And a lot of doctors are afraid to come out and say that because, again, there'll be discipline, right? But again, the information has been censored. But there are many psychologists who are coming out now and speaking up, because now they feel they have a responsibility to the public to tell them the truth. Is that they were forced to go along with the disinformation on the left. They were forced to go along with the radical ideologies on the left because their livelihoods were at stake, right? So, I mean, put yourself in their situation. Like, you have a family to support, you have a mortgage, you have bills to pay, and if you don't go along with this fascist liberal ideology, you could lose your job. Well, that's exactly what happened to Jordan Peterson, I believe. But they did him a favor. Now he's an international celebrity, best-selling author, and multimillionaire. So they did him a favor, and he is speaking out against this radical leftist woke ideology that is destroying our society. And all they can do is demonize him and engage in hate speech and censor him and try to weaponize the justice system against him. And I think they're trying to get him delicensed here in Canada. But anyway, so I think honest and psychologists will tell you that exactly what I've told you, because these stats are not my stats. They're not Christian stats. They're not religious stats. They're from the Canadian Mental Health Association. They're from the Stats Canada saying these things, that we're in a state of crisis, the opioid crisis, the fentanyl crisis, right? The suicide crisis, the depression crisis is all connected to the liberal radical ideologies, right? The whole LGBTQ movement. They themselves have quoted that they have the highest rate of mental illness. Now, they like to blackmail and try to blame it on us, but that's complete nonsense. They have to accept personal responsibility for their own lifestyles and their own behaviors. So, I mean, we have lots of stats proving that LGBTQ ideologies are not healthy, are not normal, and produce underlying mental health issues.
Yeah. I mean, I did a show. I think you saw it with Dr. Reitz Broadseth, who did just a phenomenal job addressing the LGBTQ and the
Oh,
transgender.
he's an expert. And again, all they can do is demonize and hate and censor, and that's evil. That even goes against their own ideologies. It's funny you mentioned that, Dale, because I'm just looking down here on my page. I don't think it's an accident. But Psychology Today quotes Dr. Robert Hare on this issue to say, quote, "Our society is moving in the direction of permitting, reinforcing, and in some cases actually valuing some of the traits listed in the psychopathy checklist. What makes psychopaths different from all others is the remarkable ease with which they lie, the pervasiveness of their deception, and the callousness with which they carry it out. End of quote. Dr. Robert Hare, for your audience, is a Canadian forensic psychologist known for his research in the field of criminal psychology. He is a professor. How do you say that word, Dill? Emertius.
I need to see it.
I don't have my glasses. Emeritus of the University of British Columbia, where he specializes in psychopathological and psychopathological sciences. I guess it says.
It's emeritus. It just means he's
emeritus. Yeah. So there you have a quote, one of many psychologists saying to back up exactly what I've said.
All right, awesome. What? Yeah, look, I think we kind of covered everything. Is there anything we missed? Are there?
I'd like to finish with some quotes. I have a fantastic quote here, a couple quotes, if you don't mind. Do we have time?
Yeah, absolutely. And
okay, so here's a quote. Here's a quote from Abraham Lincoln. Fantastic quote.
He says,
quote, yeah, Abraham Lincoln, you must remember that some of the things that are legally right are not morally right. Our progress into degeneracy appears to me to be pretty rapid. Can you imagine that? Our progress into degeneracy. And that's what progressive values are doing. They're not bettering our society, they're destroying our society, right? I have a quote here from John Adams, who's the second president of the United States. He says, quote, our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. So basically he's saying here that the US government, and that would include the British parliamentary system and the Canadian parliamentary system, it doesn't work with secular humanism because it was designed for moral and religious people and is inadequate, he says, for any other kind of government. We have Thomas Jefferson, who said the constitutional freedom of religion is the most sacred of all human rights, right? You have Theodore Roosevelt, we already quoted it, to educate a man in mind, but not in morals, is to educate a menace in society. And then we can finish with two quotes from our next Prime Minister, the Honorable Pierre Poilievre, Conservative leader of Canada. His first quote is, quote, the Judeo-Christian tradition rooted in the Ten Commandments and in the gospel of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. These are not old or new ideas. They are timeless ideas, and they are the ones on which we build the future. And then his last quote by Pierre Poilievre, quote, common sense conservatives will always stand for family, faith, and freedom.
Gotcha. Great quotes. The only thing I can do to sound smart is quote the late great Donald Trump. Everything woke turns to, turns to garbage.
Yeah, right. And like Elon Musk said, that I truly believe in it. That these people they're suffering from the woke mind virus. And believe it or not, your audience, please check it out. But this is what I've seen, is that Trump derangement syndrome is a real mental disorder.
Totally agree, 100%, 110%. It's not even possible, but that's how much I agree with you. So awesome. Yeah, well, thank you so much for joining me, Jamie, and also for your help behind the scenes promoting, bringing the Real Seekers podcast into the churches and stuff like that, because I think that's a great next step for my ministry. If I can pull it off and get a couple churches to say yes, especially if they say yes to the shroud, because that's something that a lot of churches are ignorant about and they have misconceptions about and stuff like that. So yeah, thank you for coming on and sharing your knowledge. And one thing I'll say so next week, I was supposed to have the famous Islamic apologist Nadir Ahmed coming on to debate the scientific foreknowledge argument in the Quran. But he's being very. I don't know. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't know. So that might be next week's show. If Nadir flakes out on me, then I just won't have a show. But the following week, on November the 30th, on a Saturday, I will be having Dr. Lydia McGrew, world famous expert on the historical evidence for the resurrection and philosopher, debating Dr. David Kemble Cook, the skeptic, on the evidence for the resurrection. So hopefully I'll have the show with Nadir next week, but just in case he flakes out, then the following week I've got a guaranteed show with Doctors Lydia McGrew and David Kemble Cook for you guys. So
Yeah. And I'm willing to do a show with you on the concept of secular humanism and actually looking at the secular humanistic manifesto and looking at some of the contradictions.
You're saying for next week? You're saying? Well,
Whenever you can set it up.
What I would like to do then, if we're going to continue on this, so Phil Baer wrote a book on cultural Marxism, which is kind of related to the secular humanism thing. Would you want to do, if he agrees?
Sure. I'm not an expert at his level, but I have an interest in cultural Marxism and on secular humanism because I think they're failed ideologies.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think you two would get along. He always says the same thing. He's like, "Don't call me a scholar. I don't have any credentials and all this."
Well, he's written books, so
yeah. Both you and him are knowledgeable. So, all right,
I'm a layman. I would call myself, Dale, a layman researcher.
Sounds good. All right, cool. I'll look into that then and see if I can arrange that, and I'll let you guys know. But other than that, have a great week, everyone. Great week to Mr. Trousers and Ringo Cat. And before I go, Mr. Trousers, I promised you we will do the music for the outro that you like. So let me bring that up. But otherwise, take care.